What are we talking about today, Frank?
Chris, I'm so glad you asked. In today's Talking Nerdy, I really wanted to talk about the layoffs at Hasbro and WotC, or Wizards of the
Why are
Coast.
we so excited saying that? It's a sad story, isn't it? Why are you so
That's a
excited?
good point.
You should be crying right now, Frank, because you're pissing on all these people who lost their jobs right before
All right.
Christmas. But guess what? We're going to turn those negatives into positives and lessons learned. So stay tuned for today's episode of Talking Nerdy.
Talking nerdy. We're just talking nerdy. With all this talking nerdy. Oh, come on, you wanna talk nerdy?
I see where you're going with this conversation. I think we need to back it up and just tell people what's happened, I guess. But, if you don't know, Hasbro's a toy
Yeah.
company. Wizards of the Coast is their biggest part of the toy company, and they are owned by Hasbro. Hasbro's the big daddy corporation, and Wizards of the Coast is like the smaller version of it with what I guess has happened is somewhere around 1,100 people have been laid off, and we're about a week or two from Christmas, which is where we're at right now. When this comes out, it might be a little closer to that time, or maybe even around Christmas when you listen to this. So, this was a fairly recent story, and I thought it was interesting. I think it's a good thing to talk about because I actually think I'm going to have some very differing views than what I've been seeing online about people talking about this stuff. So I'm curious, like, what when you heard about this, what was your impression of the story, and what did you start? How did you feel about this?
Yeah, I think for me it's very close to home because I worked at Wizards of the Coast for a little bit, so I have a lot of friends there still that still work there. B, it's in Seattle, which is where I am. They are moving offices from Renton to Bellevue, and it is very much affecting and very much felt in the larger market here. And I heard from friends, fortunately, the people that I talked to weren't laid off, but people on their teams were, and they had big cuts on their teams. Now, I will say that when I asked them about the numbers of WotC employees that were let go, they were estimating, when this news dropped, of the 1,100 people that were let go, they said that 80 to 100 employees at Wizards of the Coast were let go. So that's a little less than 10% of the overall layoffs. So that means that Hasbro, Daddy Hasbro Global, had a lot
Yeah,
of
well, to give
layoffs.
perspective, Hasbro employs about 6,500 people across its entire corporate structure as of December 2022, and they had 1,100 layoffs total. That includes 1,500 people that work specifically at Wizards of the Coast, where we're seeing about 80 people got laid off. And so I guess we can say to begin with, yeah, being laid off it sucks, right? Especially if it's, say, 2 weeks before Christmas and all of those kind of things. I'm curious, have you ever been laid off, Frank? Have you ever been fired?
Sort of, but not quite like this. Not quite like this. Have you?
No, I've never been fired. I'm curious for you, like, you wanted to talk about this. What did you want to bring up and talk about in this story, or what is it that resonates with you about this?
Well, I think it's really fascinating to me because when Hasbro has let go of, so let's back up even a little bit further. You mentioned December 2022. Hasbro had other layoffs in January of 2023. They had 800 layoffs at the time. A couple of them were at Wizards as well, but the bulk of them were again at Hasbro Global. And this
Hmm.
brings the total number to 1900 of for layoffs in 2023, and that is 30%. That is just shy of 30% of Hasbro's overall workforce in
Hmm.
2023. And sure, there were hirings here and there throughout 2023, but the bulk of it is all, people that have been there. So that's 30% of their workforce. And I also heard from people on the tech side that though those folks that were working with the Baldur's Gate 3 team, all of those hires for Baldur's Gate 3 are gone, essentially, they said. Now, I wanted to get more details, but they're in a different time zone, so I couldn't get more details on that. but essentially saying that even though Baldur's Gate 3 was such a huge success, and we'll talk about that. I really want to dive into Baldur's Gate 3. Despite that success, no one's safe.
Hmm. But is that, I guess this is what, like, this is what frustrates me about this story to begin with, is that if you look online at all the YouTube video content that's been coming out and all the people who are in our D&D space and Magic the Gathering space and the nerds out there that are kind of really trying to complain about this, right? And just saying like, "Oh my god, Hasbro and WotC are terrible companies for doing this thing called laying people off before Christmas." And you know, I guess I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know how to have that much sympathy for a lot of this. I can understand it sucks to have your job taken away from you. I can understand that, especially if you're in a position where like you were expecting to have that job for a long time or whatever it is. But this story isn't new. It's not atypical. It's not like, oh my gosh, the corporation fired, like every year corporations fire people. You work for a corporation, you're signing a deal with the devil. Like it's just, I don't work for a corporation in the same way that a lot of these corporate people do. And I kind of hate the corporate structure to begin with. The whole thing is stupid in my mind. Like, if you want to work in that kind of an environment, you're asking for this kind of thing to happen, or to work in an environment where if you are not proven to be useful or you haven't got all the tools or necessary things to make sure your job is safe, you're asking to get fired because you're not important to them. The important thing in a corporation is the shareholders. And the shareholders and the market price and all those things that matter are what determines their profit loss statements at the end of every quarter and whether or not you still are useful. And trends in the market, macro conditions affect you at the micro. And you're asking to, it's like living in Tornado Alley in Texas. And then, like, when a tornado comes through, you're like, what's going on? There's a tornado here. All my house is gone. Like, no shit. You live in Tornado Alley. Like, stop living in Tornado
I
Alley.
think one of the reasons that this is so hard for a lot of people that's actually not getting talked about, and let me clarify when I say a lot of people, one of the reasons this is so difficult for people that work specifically at Wizards of the Coast. I can't talk about Hasbro too much because my experience there was non-existent. It was mainly Wizards of the Coast. Everyone that works at Wizards of the Coast has been working so hard to get a job there. And everyone is super passionate about being involved in the intellectual properties that they love, Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons. Typically, it's usually one of those two or both. So when people work there and they finally get a job, they're so excited. And you get people that are super brilliant coming together, meeting other like-minded, passionate, brilliant people, and they get to work together every day. But then when they get laid off, there is this idea of, oh my God, I put so much into this company. I worked so hard to get a job here. How did this happen? How could I be laid off when I've worked so hard? And just as an example, there are some people that have been there for years. Mike Merles is one of them. I mean, we're not going to go into the details of like he's got a he's got some stuff in his history that you know not great. He said some things that were pretty controversial. Then there's Chris Lindsay. Those two guys are big players in the D&D space. They've been there for over 2 decades, and they were pivotal in a lot of D&D in the D&D franchise. And then a third one that's really big is Liz Shu. She was, at the time when I joined, she was head of D&D marketing. Her title changed, I think, to marketing and publishing, and I got the pleasure of meeting her a couple times, and she's a big deal. And she got let go as well. She didn't give any statements of any kind on Twitter, but those are the heavy hitters. The fact that they were laid off, I would be surprised if that was a surprise to them. But nobody's safe, and those people have been instrumental in the D&D franchise at least. And there's so many other people who aren't even mentioned or that just don't get known that also played huge roles, and they were let go.
Hmm. I guess. I would love to challenge that a little bit because I think that when you say like nobody's safe, it's like that. I don't think that's true. I think there's a lot of people that vastly overestimate their importance to things in companies. And one of the problems that I often see when people are, and by the way, I've been in companies where people have got fired, so I'm not like immune to that. I've also been the person firing people. Like I've been the person running a company that has had to let people go. Not at the level of say 1,100 people before Christmas, but yeah, sometimes you got to let people go. There is no real good time to do it. That's true. We can address the fact that it was done before Christmas. I actually think that's not a bad thing. I think that's probably way better than doing it in January, if you want my opinion. Um, and I can explain that if you like. But just say like, okay, this guy Mike Merles, cool. He was very found. Say maybe he was foundational in some capacity of developing D&D Fifth Edition, right? Well, a lot of this stuff is creative energy. A lot of this is intellectual property. A lot of this is, people come in with new ideas, new things, and they create and give over a lot of their vast, greatest creative energies to a company. I want you to think about that for a second. Like, let's take a look at anyone who's created the best work of art. Like, Stephen King. He's a person who's a prolific writer, right? What was his best book? Do you have any idea? What do
No,
you
I
think?
would say it.
Let's say it, because it became a huge intellectual
Multiple
property. I'd say
movies.
The Shining, multiple movies. Also, The Shining is a really great one. Like either of those. What I'm saying is, like, let's say it's it or The Shining or any of those, right? He wrote it for himself. He published it. He put it out there. It became one of his best, most powerful things, right? Some people don't do that. They don't take their greatness and their creativity and put it into what they want to create for themselves. What they do is they go work for a company, expunge their greatest work, their greatest creative work into a company and get paid a fraction of what it's really probably worth and give it to that company for a salary. And so what happens is at the end of the day, those people may have already given their brilliance. They already gave them The Shining. So he might think, well, I gave you The Shining. Aren't I super valuable? No, you've already given us The Shining. And we're not a person. We're a corporation. We do not care. We don't have emotions. Your manager might miss you, but the corporation will not. And I think that people need to hear that if you're looking at working for a company like this forever. It's not
But
smart.
what
There's no such thing as job security, no matter how good you think you
What
are.
about when the company says, hey, we want your best ideas? I've worked at companies that say, we
Of course
want
they
to
do.
invest in you. We want you as talent to grow here. We want it to feel like a family. We want you to be a part of our community and create your
You're
best
even saying
ideas
this
working
in a very
together
seductive
and
voice for a reason.
give your everything to our corporation. That's the kind of
That's
thing.
exactly what they want.
Yeah, right. So as someone who's, taking the employee's perspective, you are doing what you're told because you want to be appreciated. You also maybe like that validation from your employer, as we were talking about, but more so, you want to show your values so that you have job security.
Nothing is worse than an employee mentality. Honestly, like I just don't think you should act like an employee. If you want to be first off, you want to have job security, think like an entrepreneur. That's actually how you win in these kind of scenarios. There's a lot of people who didn't lose their job. And the reason these people did is probably bloated salaries, that they were being overpaid for what they were. They weren't providing the value worth what they were being offered, because there were high level, C-level people who were fired as well, all the way up to like vice presidents and stuff like that, which makes sense because a lot of problems have happened in the Hasbro toy industry in the last year and a bit, plus along with inflation and the closure of retail and like all these issues that have happened in a macro level. Yeah, you're going to get screwed up. And unfortunately, if you're not really valuable or you're not actually providing at the level, or maybe you're just not likable, these are all things that matter in a corporate structure or any company structure. You have to be thinking about it also from the company structure. I've worked with a ton of employees, and one of the worst things that I had as a person who employed people for many, many years was an employee who didn't understand that they were part of a bigger whole. They were just focused on their job.
I hear you. And
And I hate
I
that. That's not a good
I
employee.
really agree with several things you're saying, but for the sake of devil's advocate, I'm going to continue on the path that I'm on. But Chris, what about Chris Cox? He makes 1.5 million guaranteed as a salary, but last year he made a combined total of over $9 million. Shouldn't we take some of
Mhm.
his bloated budget?
Probably, yeah. I don't really like what he's doing, but I agree that hey, if there is a part of society that is probably way overpaid for what it does, it's the absolute CEO, CFO, COO opportunities that are out there. I agree with you on that one that there's probably way too much overpay and lack of responsibility in that C-suite. I agree. I'm not going to argue with that. I just think that employees need to look at it from a reality standpoint of like you chose to go into Tornado Alley, and when a tornado came through, you got complainy that a tornado came through. Like every corporation cuts people every year or every couple years when they don't have, even when they have good years, they've cut things because it makes sense. Like if you're in Tornado Alley, expect tornadoes and show up accordingly. Like that's why it's cutthroat in these types of jobs. That's why people who spend time, buttering up or like getting to know their managers or the people being likable, doing all those extra things, or people who at least understand the structures in the company and what's really important to the company and align what they do to become invaluable. Those are the people who stay within a company. And I mean, most of the people that I've seen get fired and have been like lost, they were initially upset. They were, clearly upset. And usually it's because they thought they were doing enough. They thought they were doing enough to be considered invaluable for this company and that their contributions and work were so important because they were doing everything that they did accurately. But what they weren't doing was thinking about how do they add more than just that value to the company. Hey, Nerdpreneurs, Chris coming at you. You may have just been wondering, how do I get into be a supporter of this podcast? Well, we use Patreon and we call all of our Patreon subscribers board members, and they are part of the
Awesome Nerdpreneur Board.
Not only will board members receive extra content, extended interviews, and our undying love, in the future they'll also be invited to our Discord community as well as monthly staff meetings where they can ask us questions, boardroom style, and have an influence not only on who we interview, but what we actually ask them in upcoming shows. Sounds pretty cool, right? Well, if you want to support us, go to patreon.com/nerdpreneur and sign up to be a member of the board today. Now back to the episode. You really can't work to rule or work just for your job or just within your job description in a modern society. In my mind, like, I don't think it's smart if you're going to be, especially in any environment, any corporate culture, or any even small company like what we work for. We work for smaller companies. It's actually, in my mind, smart to do that because you can really carve out an area where you become invaluable. You can have responsibility and ownership over something, especially if you're capable, if you're really capable. And over time, they learn to trust you more and more and more so that they don't want to get rid of you. But over time, you also get people like when things are bloated and there's lots of people who just do their job and that's all they do. And they're not thinking about the overall structures or the macro conditions or what's valuable to the company. They're thinking about themselves and their paycheck and what they need to do to keep getting that paycheck. And unfortunately, that's just not a really good long-term way of living or maintaining your job security. Most people who get fired, I actually don't think, sure, there might be some people that were like vice presidents that just had bloated salaries and they probably just don't add that much. I'm not going to lie. There's the C-suite's probably where they could make more cuts. But there's a lot of people who overvalue their value to a company just because they do their job. And that job may not actually even have much use. And they're thinking macro terms. Like if you're a leader within a company, here's another concept that I think helps people when they work within a company is as a leader, you're responsible for less details, but you're responsible for more time. So as you go higher up in the company, the Chris Coxes of the world are not responsible for page 6 on the player's handbook. You know what I mean? Like they're not responsible for that level of thing. What they're responsible for is the next 10 years of the company and what directions and where that goes, and how they weather the storms of these macro trends of, where is the overall trend of players going? Are they moving towards more of an online space? Are they going to be more engaged with a video tabletop RPG versus a pen and paper system? Those are the things that he's thinking about at a different level versus the person who's like, what art do we put on page 6? Right? How do we format this page? He's not responsible for that. But there's a lot of people out there that think that's what makes this company really good. And they were really good at formatting the pages. So that's what they do. And it's like, we're going to have AI do that in the future. You're basically going to be useless in 5 years, anyways. So if you're not thinking ahead, like 5 years in terms of time as an employee and how you become, like, you have to think like Chris Cox in order to maintain your stature in a company like that. And a lot of people don't. They just don't think that way when they're in a company.
I want to
They think about their
I want to
job.
back up something you said earlier. Yes, I agree with what you're saying. It's a very interesting point about a higher level management managing time rather than details. It's super true.
Well, they're just responsible for more time,
Right.
right? Whereas, like, when you're an employee, you're only responsible for your roles or your job description, right? But if you only ever take on the responsibilities that you're given, then, and you never think about, what am I responsible for in terms of more time, right? Like, I'm responsible for the time it takes, like this project that takes a few months. Like,
Right.
that's
Exactly.
only a few months versus like Chris Cox is thinking decades in the future of where this whole company is going to go to maintain it for the long term.
Yeah. And so those kind of decisions that the Chris Coxes of the world have to manage, it ties into how earlier you were saying that people who work in their position that just work to provide the value that their job description is are in a trap. And I want to tell you a story about how I was in that situation. So this is not a shit on Wizards of the Coast session. This is more so a reality of what it is to work at a large corporation. So I would just want to say that,
Which you've done,
right.
right?
And it
So
was Wizards of the Coast. Now, I was in a slightly unique situation because I was on a contract for a year. And that contract had the great promise of being renewed, but ultimately did not happen. It was not renewed. Well, technically, it couldn't get renewed because of laws in Seattle. What it is you would get flipped. And it did not happen, despite working really hard on my end. When I didn't get flipped, when that didn't happen, my world was crushed because that was a dream for me to work there. I had sacrificed to take a position that was minimum wage, that I felt and that my management felt was below my expertise and qualifications, but I wanted to do it to get my foot in the door. So, and I'm not an abnormal story. There were so many people that did the same thing because they had the dream of working at Wizards of the Coast. And I did more than just my job. I searched for those opportunities to provide value above and beyond because I knew A, I could do it, I was qualified, and B, I really wanted to prove myself so they would flip me. Well, we know the end of the story. It didn't happen. I got let go and I job hunted for 5 months. In that 5 months, I knew that I couldn't rely on an employer. Essentially what you're saying. And I made some of my own projects. There was a YouTube channel I tried, which was called Tail Whip, and that's like tail as in the tale that you tell. And that was fun, great learning opportunity. I used it in job interviews, but ultimately, I knew that once I got my next job, and when I did get hired, I knew that this was my goal, was to train myself on things that I could use for my own business, that I could use for my own entrepreneurial ventures. And that is what I hear you're saying is that when you work somewhere, make sure that you are meeting your needs for the employer, should you be employed, but also make sure that you are meeting the needs of your own endeavors. And that was my
Mhm.
goal was, okay, I want to work in video. I want to work in content creation, specifically around video. These skills are going to help me in almost any way I want. And they have. In our podcast, I've been able to use a lot of the skills I learned at work. And I even did a short reel on this a month or two ago about the importance of the opportunity to learn at your day job to use for your own entrepreneurial goals. And I
Yeah.
think that taking that time to sit down with yourself, maybe journal if that's how you reflect best, dear listener, to reflect on what it is at your day job that aligns with what you find really valuable and what you want to do as an entrepreneur, and find those things, because you're going to get more passionate about that and it's going to look good to an employer, which is a small benefit. The main thing is you are going to get to grow and you're going to get paid for it.
Yeah. And I think it's important to, yeah, look at a job opportunity or a corporate job or any of that kind of thing as a training ground, especially if you're new to the job market, you're just getting started and you're like, I'm going to work and I need
Totally.
to make money or whatever. It's like, yes, but generally it's a good idea no matter where you go where you will learn the most, grow personally and professionally. Sometimes it makes sense to make less money just to grow. I'll tell you, when I was a entrepreneur, I took major pay cut from being a sales rep, because being a sales rep, I made commission just for myself. Being a manager and becoming an entrepreneur, I had to train sales reps and make commissions off of what they gave me. And it was much harder to do that. And my pay went way down for many years because I had no idea how to manage people or get them to work well. And you had the risk of all the overhead and all the employers and all the other stresses that go along with being a business owner. But I will say that the experience and the opportunity to grow and learn from that experience and to then now have the perspective of what it means to be a small business owner is invaluable. And the skills that I had to learn through failure of doing that were what make me a much more valuable contractor or employee if I ever work for someone or anything like that. And so I do think that there's a lot of people out there that might just be enticed by, oh, I got a corporate job at the job that I really wanted to, like, oh my gosh, it's so much fun to work in D&D. I don't know, did you find that? I'm curious, like, when you did the job that you were dreaming of doing, this contract work, like, was it all glamour and what you
Hell
wanted?
no.
Because I feel like that's just a
It
myth,
was
right?
it
It's
was
like
not at
it's like the
all.
dog that wants to catch the car. When you catch the car, what are you going to do with it? It's probably sucks.
It's
It's probably not even
it's
worth it.
just like that saying, don't meet your heroes. It's just like that. It was don't don't if you have a dream to work somewhere because you love their product, just enjoy their product. Honestly, I mean,
Yeah.
I know that there are people that work at Wizards of the Coast that would completely disagree with me, and that is fine. Like, also keep in mind, I'm a bit jaded. I'm a bit jaded from the experience, and so I've convinced myself over the years that, oh, I don't want to work there anyway because I couldn't get the job. I couldn't stick the landing. And I've had friends since then say, "Would you reapply?" And I tell them, like, maybe, but ultimately probably not, because it's kind of like that ex girlfriend, that prior relationship where you're like, even if like they dumped me, and even if they were to take me back, I think there's too much history. I think there's too
Yeah, they're
much.
gonna dump you again.
Yeah, there's the
There's no
fear.
guarantee they're not gonna dump you
Exactly.
again. And even if you stayed all the way through, what's the long game? Are you gonna marry this person? Are they gonna give you a Rolex at 60 years in? Like, I don't know. Like, what is the long-term gain? Like, how much do they care about people even who've been there for 10, 20, 30 years? That's the corporate structure, is that they don't care. They don't have to care.
They
There's no such
show
thing as
It's
job security.
interesting. Wizards of the Coast has a unique model where they give you these like trophies, in air quotes, if you will, for certain milestones you hit. So one of my friends that works there has worked there for over 20 years, and they have pretty good job security in what they do because they're kind of a team of 1 to 3, and
Yeah.
if the other two go, then they are the one team on their own. So, but that position needs to be filled by somebody. So they have this trophy that they recently got that was a large in like increased size of a magic card, like massive. I forget what they're called. There's a technical term for the magic cards that get this big, but it was a unique print that was specific to them and their personality. And so they'd get stuff like that at 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and various milestones like that. So there's that appearance of appreciation, but that's kind of it.
Yeah. You know what my dad would say to that? Why didn't they give you
Yeah,
money?
right. That's totally your dad.
That's the question I think some people should ask. It's like, if they're giving you this kind of shit,
How much did it cost?
like
Why
like
not? Why not give it to me?
why are they giving you that instead of more money,
Hmm.
more
Yeah.
value? It's because they don't think you have more value, but they don't want you thinking that.
Yeah.
And so I mean, and I'm not against, like, here's the thing. Appreciation is a great way to manage people. And I've worked with people before where I've given them cards, I've given them appreciation, I've given all those things because sometimes you can't pay them more. Their job is a minimum wage job. It's just what the value of that job is, unfortunately, you know. And if you're a janitor at Watsy or you're doing these sort of things, you might have a salary that is just what it is because that's what the value of that work is for that company. And if they give you some of those nice things, it's a nice thing to do for jobs where there's no extra value. But just realize that, like, when you're there, don't romanticize the employer. Like, I don't romanticize it. I don't take for granted that I could get fired. Like, there's a reason I save a significant amount of money. There's a reason I have a very sizable emergency fund for me so that if anything happens, I'm okay. Like, there's a reason why, like, when I got my opportunity, I specifically started setting myself up so that I could be able to have many pillars. It's harder to take me out. I have the investments, you know, we have side businesses and side hustles. I do coaching on the side. I have my main job. And then on top of being valuable there, I'm building things with this podcast and making connections and finding opportunities here, right? There's a lot of things that we should be doing as just in general, like, people to be secure. And if you're wrapping up all of your security within one thing called a corporate job, you're really asking for something to go wrong, in my mind.
I agree, and I want to hammer the point home just a little bit more by some folks may think, you know what, my company that I work for is doing well. I don't really need to be that afraid. And while I'm not trying to put the fear of God into our listeners, I really do want to hammer one point that I found while doing some research on this event. And that is that Wizards of the Coast had a good year. They had arguably the best year they've had in a while. Sure, they had great years during the pandemic, but this year they had three really big successes. Actually, one giant success and a couple other successes. The other successes, the D&D movie came out, and that did pretty well. It did better than a lot of expectations. It wasn't amazing, but it did pretty well. And they're talking about a sequel at this point. They're even talking about a TV show. And Wizards of the Coast also has a TV channel now. Apparently, there are these things called fast channels, which are they're free channels with ads. And they've got a cooking show, which is a great idea because they have their Hero Feast books, which are beautiful and really tasty recipes. And then they've also got these live play shows, which makes total sense. And so that is
Hmm.
going on. I don't know exactly how well the fast channels are being received. I didn't even know about them, and I'm in the community. And then Baldur's Gate 3, like we mentioned, huge success. It swept away 4 awards at the Game Awards. They got best community support, which I totally agree with. Very active people on the community support team at Wizards of the Coast and Laren Studios. Best multiplayer game, best RPG, and full Game of the Year award. And it had some huge competition. I mean, Zelda was on there, and many other games like Alan Wake and Final
Spider-Man
Fantasy.
2.
Spider-Man 2, that's right.
Spider-Man
Resident
2
Evil
was great, by the
4
way.
remake was a really big deal
Hmm.
because that was a really good game. So, yeah, you played Spider-Man 2.
Yeah, it was awesome. I also played Baldur's Gate 3, and I agree, it deserves it. Like, it's a better constructed game, and it's massive. Like, just the scope of it on its own is incredibly
Yeah,
impressive. But
and these were great things for them. I mean, they had other things as well. WotC's revenue was up $120 million compared to last year so far from Q3 to this Q3. And they also doubled their profits in Q3 compared to last year's Q3. So WotC did really
yeah.
well. WotC's always been the golden goose for Hasbro. I always see it as like Hasbro's the big giant, and then WotC's the golden goose that keeps laying those eggs. They keep doing a great job.
Hmm.
And that's just to say, just to drive the point home that don't think that because you work at a big corporation that's doing well, that your job is safe. It's always a good
No.
idea to have your own plan, your own backup plan.
Yeah, and also, I mean, yeah, you should have savings. I always say, like, if you don't have $1,000 just in an emergency fund for when emergencies happen, start with that. get $1,000 together. But then once you do that, pay off. The focus you should have is on paying off all your debt. Because what people wind up getting screwed with is people, they get fired and then they have all these things they're committed to paying because they have debts, like cars and houses are very typical, but then they also have like rung up a huge credit card bill from like 6 months and all this other stuff, right? And this is also why I think it's actually a good thing that they fired these people before Christmas.
Really?
Like a lot of people, yeah, a lot of people are going to be like, "Oh my God, why did you do this? Why did you fire people right before?" Because what's the alternative? They fire them after Christmas, after they've spent all this money on their family, racked up their credit card bills, and now they don't have a job to pay for it. At least before going into Christmas, they can tighten their belts a little bit, have a more conservative Christmas, not blow out their credit card bills, realize they're not getting a bonus. Like all those things that go along with Christmas, you put them in a really bad, like, what would the headlines be if they fire people January 2nd? Watsy fires all these people after Christmas, and then all the stories will come out of people who
Can't pay off their credit
they
card debt.
can't pay off their credit card debt. They just spent all these things for their kids, and they have to go return them. Like that's going to be even worse. So there's no good time to fire people. I get it. Like it sucks. And by the way, if you're one of these people who got fired, I know it sucks, but I want you to know that there's no value in being the victim right now and being a victim of this corporate situation. And sometimes what people need to hear, and what a lot of people who have been fired through their life look back on that as blessings in disguise. Because even though, you look back now and you say, "Oh man, it sucks. I didn't get renewed for that contract, or I got fired from this thing from Watsy essentially because they didn't want me anymore." What if you had gone into that and you've been working with them for the last few years and then you did get fired here? Like like maybe that's what would have happened to you, or maybe you would have just not been, maybe down the road, if you were in that situation and working with them, maybe it just wasn't actually what you would have wanted. And think about all the things you're doing now because you were not working for Watsy, that are providing humongous value to you from a learning standpoint, from a financial standpoint, from an opportunity
Yeah.
standpoint, from relationship
Watsy would not have
standpoint.
let me
Like,
do what I do for
the,
my current job. They would not have
yeah,
given me the
and
clearance ever.
no, and on top of that, you probably wouldn't have been able to talk about stuff on a
Nope,
podcast. You probably
not at all.
wouldn't have met. You may not have met the girl that you're with. You may not have, met me along the way. I'm just saying, there's a lot of things that could have hurt your life in the long run. I'm not saying that I'm the only best thing in your life. I'm just saying, no. All I'm trying to say is that, you know what? There's a lot of times when bad things happen to us, and one of them might be getting fired. And I appreciate that. That's probably, if you're in that moment, like, it's okay to feel like that sucks, but like, how long do you want to feel like that and blame Watsy for it? Because blaming Watsy for it, or blaming Hasbro and the macro conditions that you can't control, are not going to get you any further forward. And the only way to move forward is to stop being the victim and actually look at it and say, what am I responsible for? Did I put myself in a situation where I was susceptible to this level of being screwed? Did I save money, or did I just squander it all? Did I take any of that opportunity that I had to get paid and put myself in a position where I have now 3 months of salary that's saved so that I can live for 3 months? Or do I have 6 months of salary saved? Do I have a year's worth of salary, which is what I recommend everyone get to, is a year's worth of salary saved, so that you don't have to ever worry.
To the credit
There's
of
a,
the the laid off Watsy employees, there have been many of them on Twitter that have just said, like, this happened.
yeah,
I thank Watsy for my time there, and I am looking and excited for future opportunities. They've been very humble.
yeah,
They've been very much like, this is the thing, and they know they're in the tech industry. The tech
this
industry
is
ebbs and
not a
flows
surprise.
like the
Yeah.
tides. It happens
Yeah, exactly. Like if you were in Silicon Valley, you would be expecting things to happen every year.
every
Like
year.
which major layoff
I
is going
want
to, like,
equity,
I
not
I
salary,
think that
they'd say.
I think a lot of people are talking about this because it's just very fashionable to shit on Hasbro, and there's lots of reasons to shit on Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast
It's fun.
beyond just their layoffs. There is lots of reasons. I think it's there's a lot of things you could talk about that are more important to talk about than just like, oh, they corporate laid off people. It sucks, sure, but it's not unexpected. It's also not a thing that if if it happens to you is always the worst thing in the world. It could be a blessing in disguise where you find the next opportunity, you get to exercise that creative energy in a different way. Or like Mike Merles, maybe he hasn't done his most brilliant work yet. Maybe he was just doing his basic work for WotC, and his next thing is going to be what's incredible. So keep that in mind. Like, what is going to be your shining? What is going to be your it? That, if you've created one of those brilliant works under a program like that, why not go and try it for yourself, right? With whatever it is that you have as an entrepreneur, that skill set, go and turn a negative into a positive. There's no value in sitting there and being the victim and blaming other people for the situation, even though it could feel crappy right now or be sucky. But trust me, you'd rather, like, it's like, when would you rather have your girlfriend break up with you? After Christmas or before Christmas? And personally,
Oh,
I'd rather have
before.
it before Christmas, because then you don't have to buy her a
Oh,
gift.
God.
You don't have to, you can hang out with your family. You can have freedom to do whatever you want. All
It's
those
not
other
bringing
things,
you
like, you'd
down.
much rather do it. Exactly. Well, it'll probably be a shitty Christmas for a few reasons, because, like, oh, you might miss a few things for sure. You might miss her. But the point is, I'm like, if that's going to happen, I'd rather have it before Christmas and before she meets all my family and gets tied into all, like, there's a lot of reasons why, to me, I think it was actually a good move for WotC in their weird wisdom. Like, one thing corporations are good at, laying people off. They do it all the time. They've probably fucked it up before and done it the wrong way. This is probably the best possible way for them to do it. Is like, short, sweet, you're done. Boom. Sorry. Now at least you know for Christmas what to shop for. So go to the Dollarama. Here's your severance check. All right. Like, it's talk to you later. But you know what? If you let everything go and drag out to the perfect time where everybody is going to think, it turns out to be the worst time ever, and it never works out.
I think what you said about this is not just a shit on WotC, shit on Hasbro. And I think that this episode, this talk is so much
I
about
think I'm
what
kind of
you've.
sticking up for him a bit,
Well, I
actually.
know you are, but the idea of being an entrepreneur, the importance
Yeah.
of wearing that entrepreneur's hat. And
If you're an entrepreneur, you have to think like WotC sometimes.
oh,
That's
yeah.
what I'm trying to get into people, is like, if you're listening to our podcast, you should be very conscious about listening to all these people who are complaining about employees being fired, because you might be, if you really want to be a great entrepreneur, you're probably going to be in the position of WotC, not and Hasbro, more often than in the position of the person who got fired.
And another hat to wear when looking at this is, think about how Hasbro's stock is falling right now. They're making moves like this.
Mhm.
Their stock is falling. Keep an eye on it. And if you do buy stocks, or if you want to get into buying stocks, keep an eye on this, because this is going to continue to go down. They're reaching a new low right now, so it might go back up soon. I don't know. I don't have any insider knowledge. Anyone that says they do, be very careful.
Well, Christmas always helps them, so they'll probably
Christmas
go up a
helps,
bunch.
but I would
Yeah.
expect Q1 their numbers are going to be better, because they had these layoffs. So you're going to see that their costs go down in Q1. They're going to have, like you just said, Christmas revenue boom. That's going to show that their revenue went up in Q4 and carried into Q1 probably. They've also announced several new products. They announced their big 1D&D, and that apparently is going to be at least two massive tomes. One is supposed to have 12 classes and 4 subclasses. That's right there, 48 classes. That's huge. And then there's monster manual is going to have 500 monsters in it. I don't remember how many are in the normal monster manual, but
not even close to that. But it's great that they're fleshing it
this
out.
is great. This is going to be a big installment. But I also heard, I don't know if you told me this, Chris, off mic, but I also heard that they originally were going to release it in January, but then they revised that public release because they knew that was going to hurt their Christmas sales if they told people.
Yes, but it was April.
And now
it was an accident. It was a misprint on some of their social media. They posted, and it had said, Player's Handbook D&D, whatever, 6th edition, next edition, 1D&D, whatever they're calling it. And it was like, it had the date April 2024 in it. And then they cut that down and put it up with no dates, but a bunch of people
They
did
got
see that
that.
because it was like, who's gonna buy 5th edition stuff for Christmas if there's no uh if they know it's coming out in
Yeah.
April and it's only going to have a 4-month shelf life before everything gets replaced. And so who knows, it's probably already hurt some of their Christmas sales, but the
Well, the
thing is that they're not
layoffs,
even
the
making that money.
layoffs are turning into a boycott now.
Well, they're not even making that much money on books. Like, keep that in mind. Like, books is not
Oh,
where
you
they're going
mean
to make a bunch of
profit?
their money.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not where they're not going to make a bunch of their
That's
money.
like
Like, they make way more money
D&D
and profit off
Beyond.
of D&D
Exactly.
Beyond,
Yeah.
right? Like, that's where they want people to be. And then on top of that, they want, because then they're going to launch a virtual tabletop, which is really what they're looking to do. That's their long-term game plan. That's what
Yeah.
Chris Cox is talking about. That's where they're going with the
They're
company.
going way more
That's the
digital.
big long-term. Yeah, it's not going to, they don't care about the books that much. And to be fair, I'm okay with that because there's dozens and dozens and dozens of other tabletop RPGs that are coming out in the next year. And I mean, you talk about Critical Role moving away from that and launched their own tabletop this last year. Then you have people like
Dimension 20.
MC MCDM,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Matthew
Yeah,
Colville.
yeah, Colville. Matt Colville's coming out with his thing. He's doing a Kickstarter or something like that with
Yeah.
it right now.
What was it? 3
And so,
million in 3 days? Their goal was 800,000 and they reached 3
yeah,
million.
yeah, so there's a lot of, and they probably, I'm gonna guess they pushed it up just because of all this anti-Watsy kind of thing going on. Which is smart. They're good business people and entrepreneurs. I kind of think that, like, you should watch people who are entrepreneurial in these situations and be like, wow, why did they do that? Why are they sending this out when they don't really know exactly how it's gonna work? They're just telling us about it, right? Like, why are they doing it now?
Right.
Christmas sales and the anti-Watsy / Hasbro like fervor right now is going to make people out of spite go and fund this, right? Because it's like, this is way cooler, even though it's not ready. They don't have a lot of things
It's a
together and they know what might
half-finished
change.
Kickstarter. When I looked at it, I was
Yeah,
like, this is sold quite well, but doesn't look
but
very
it's
polished.
because so much of it is like, as an entrepreneur, sometimes you have to fire before you aim. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, you have to. It's really important sometimes to go out there and fire before you aim. And then, you know what? You go and course correct as you went, because timing for them was more important than finished product, right? Or these other factors that you might consider. And so this is the entrepreneurial mindset. And this is why, again, like for Watsy, it probably made a lot of sense from a macro level to do this before Christmas because, one, there's going to be lots of bad stories of other things. They already knew their Christmas sales were going to be probably affected by all this negative press this year to begin with. They're like, let's just mitigate the damage. We'll get them back next year with a
I
great
bet you they
1D. They'll forget about
calculated
all
this
this.
loss, and that's
100%
why
they
they
did.
cut
Yeah.
even more jobs. I bet you they were
Yeah.
like, well, if we're going to take a hit from it doing any layoffs, we might as well do a little extra just to like cushion things.
Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to
And
say, hold
so,
on, real about Colville real quick.
yeah.
I think I'm actually really excited. When I was watching that 51-minute Instagram ad, I didn't watch the whole thing, but I
Yeah.
watched enough of it and I was thinking like he's explaining a lot of these features as like we're going to do it different. He never said D&D, but he hinted at it multiple times. And he said we're going to do this, it's going to
Yeah.
be very different. And he started to explain the features and I think he's dressing these up as being different, but they sound really quite similar. If you play D&D enough, you're going to know that. But what I also really like, and I think that's a good move on their part, they want to differentiate themselves. That's the whole point of showing that we are making something different, but similar. And the similarity that they did really well is you want a simple game that you can go out and you can be heroes. You don't have to manage, they literally say in their description, you don't have to manage rations, you don't have to manage torches or arrows. You just go out and you are heroic. And I was thinking, I really like managing my rations. I like managing the number of days. I love crunching numbers. Hell, I started to homebrew my own like city simulator for D&D so that the heroes can pretend that they are building a settlement and nobody wants to play it. Most people want to play this Matt Colville kind of game where you're just a hero. They know what they're doing,
Yeah.
and they've done this. They've done a whole bunch of content. Matt has released and his team have released so much. They're gonna do a great job. I'm expecting, but I would be very curious, and I might back it just so I can see how it compares to their competition, the not to be named Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. And then on top of that, I mean, there's just so many places that people are putting out new materials like this. And so this is where for me I'm like, there is a renaissance that has been coming of tabletop RPGs where D&D has been losing market share to other large uh, influencers who are creating their own thing. And I love that.
Yeah.
Like that is what's exciting about this industry right now, is that there is an opportunity for the big corporation to kind of lose some of the ground. And I'm not in support of WotC or D&D or all those sort of things. They've done plenty on their own. You know, they've had a lot of missteps as a corporation this year. And that has hurt them tremendously. But what that means is it has provided opportunity for all these other people, like Paizo, you know,
Yep.
who launched their Pathfinder 2 and did the Orc thing, the Orc license. And now there's people who are just really, really invested with Pathfinder. Then there's all these other, and like MCDM, which kind of moved away, Critical Role, which has created
DM
their own thing.
Dave, they started to launch
DM
their own
Dave is doing his own
TTRPG.
thing. Yeah, he's doing his own stuff. There's all the and like there's just a lot of that diversification now, and now it's about it's almost analogous to how like everybody's coming up with their own AI.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of idea. It's weird, but like you know, the way that, and it's also kind of the way that it worked with pasta sauces. Okay, like it's kind of crazy. Like,
Hold
but
on,
the
you
way
have to go in.
people,
Wait, what? Pasta sauce?
yeah, well, back in the day when pasta sauce in the 70s, or I believe it was 60s or 70s, there was only like 2 or 3 types
And you
of
were
pasta
there for
sauce.
this.
And
You were like
pasta sauce,
16 years old when this happened,
I,
right?
I'm not that old. I was dead, but I wasn't
I
even
was
thought
dead.
of. No, but this is the story of pasta sauce. You can look into it. It's from Malcolm Gladwell. He wrote a whole book. Blink. He went into
Okay.
details on this. Anyway, so the point, the way what it is, and it's actually one of just go look up Malcolm Gladwell's pasta sauce TED Talk. It's great. It explains this in detail, but it's also in his book Blink. But what it was is back in the day, 60s, 70s, there used to be only like, you know, they wanted to make the most authentic, best pasta sauce, right? And so they're like, oh, let's make, you know, something that's like rich and rich and smooth and like all this flavor in it or whatever it is, right? And so they were trying to do that, and what they found out when they did real testing, when they talked to people, is that there was really 3 categories of people for pasta sauce, and I can't exactly remember what they were, but there was like this, like, you know, rich kind of taste, and then there was this other kind of taste, and then there was this one kind of taste that was like chunky and, you know, yummy that way, like that had more texture to it. And they realized that nobody on the market had ever put out a pasta sauce that was in that chunky market. So that's why Prego or Ragu or whatever it was, I think it was Ragu, came out with that and completely took over the market because they grabbed 30% market share on their right away because nobody was targeting it. And then now where do you go when you go to the pasta store, or when you go to the pasta store, when you go to the grocery store and you look at pasta sauces, you don't see like 1 or 2 types. You see like 70 different types of pasta sauces because they realize we don't want one type. We want, everyone has their own personal style of pasta sauce and flavors and, you know, textures and things that they want, so they want to serve a global market. It's the same with like knives. There's low, medium, high quality knives in the market. There's low, medium, like, but and so companies will come out and try to capture the whole market. And that's what's happening with AI too. It's like, oh, the Twitter AI, you know, the Google AI, Open AI, you know, Microsoft has their AI. Like all of these people are coming out with their personal AI. My company came out with its own AI that's focused on, you know,
What?
what we do.
Wow.
So there's a lot of things. There's a lot of companies that are doing that. And I mean, in the digital marketing industry, they're on the cusp of this. There's a ton of places that are launching their own marketing version of AIs, or AIs that help you create content, or AIs that help you design, you know, and edit your videos. Like this is a huge game changer. So now what's happening in the digital and the tabletop RPG space is we don't want one tabletop RPG. There is dozens of them. This is a huge space. People don't realize the potential of this space. The concept of tabletop RPGs is a new concept for a lot of people in the world, and especially just the developed world. It doesn't even count the developing world in multiple languages and all over the world that hasn't even had a chance to tap into this.
I mean, that's why we
And
put
so,
together our PDF, the ultimate tabletop role playing game list. I mean, there's
yeah,
we got a
anything for any flavor of kind of game you
Devin
want, you can
Schulich.
go in
Yeah,
there and
Devin
find.
Schulich came onto the
Yeah.
show and he told us all of these. And there's over 20.
And we keep adding our own as we play more,
Yeah.
right? Like it's awesome. Like I want to put in Dread because that's the one with the Jenga tower. So if you want to play stuff with no real heavy rules, it's great. I also think there's I just played one that was all about being a bear, Honey Heist,
Oh, I've heard of that.
which was
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, Honey Heist was a lot of fun. So and again, so it's not about your best tabletop RPG, which is what the model has been for years and years and years and years, has been like, oh, what's the best tabletop RPG? I'll play the best one, and that's D&D, Dungeons and Dragons. It's not about that. It's the best tabletop RPGs. How many of them? Like, I want one. I want my rich and chunky, you know, um, tabletop RPG, which might be, for me, that hero system that doesn't require me to do attack rolls. It just gives me damage.
Yeah.
I love that, right? That mechanic sounded really fun and really cool. And it just means, and that everything has like the ability to create consequences and reactions. And so there's things that he was talking about in it that made it sound really interesting and fun, that from a practical standpoint, I think that's going to appeal to a huge part of the demographic. But then you're going to have people like you who are like, I need more details. I need more math. Where's something a little more what we call crunchy? All right. So I need to sink my teeth into some numbers. And by the way, there's already tons of these out there for you,
I
Frank.
know.
You don't
That's
need
why
to
I'm playing
create one.
Star Trek Adventures. It's
Exactly,
like,
right?
oh, you
You
want
have
to
all the
build up
things.
your spaceship and create new technologies? Okay, let's make some
You,
rolls.
you have Modifius for
I
you,
do.
okay? They have been serving you and your favorite intellectual properties for a while. So like Modifius is for Frank, and then we have people out there that probably are like, I just want like rules light stuff. So you might want to go play Dread, which is a Jenga tower instead of like a rolling dice situation.
Yeah, there's
And so
there's different products for
there's
different people, but also different scenarios. And I think that this does circle back on what we're saying earlier about making, having your own project, your own thing in mind. Because, for example, people that worked at Wizards of the Coast were game designers, but they couldn't, they signed in their agreement that they couldn't do any of their own IP. If they did anything of
Mhm.
their own, they had to license it to Wizards of the Coast. And that's to protect WotC's butt, because if they feel like you are taking ideas from work and profiting on your own, that's a conflict for them. That's a real problem. So you can
Yeah.
understand it from their perspective, but it sure as hell didn't feel good, because when I worked there, I had an idea that I wanted to pitch them, because you could do that every year. They had this panel that you could pitch ideas to, and I decided I didn't want to do it because last year I had heard, or the year before I was there, I heard that there was a guy who pitched the Transformers card game. And it was
Mhm.
actually a really cool card game. It didn't take off. It didn't do terribly well, but it was really fun. But WotC, in fact, actually Hasbro took it and said, "Cool, thank you for the idea. You can't work on it. We're putting a team on it." Like, and the team was really qualified people, but the guy who came up with it, he had this honorary position on the team, but he didn't have any real decision power.
And how much of the share price did he
I
get?
don't think he got anything.
So that should teach you a little bit about who the company is. They're telling you every year, give us your ideas, give us your ideas. We want to know them because we will use them and steal them and profit off them. It's really like again, you're living in Tornado Alley.
Yeah.
Like, or if you like, if let me, I've told people this too before. It's like, if you get into the ring with a grizzly bear and then complain that the grizzly bear is acting like a goddamn grizzly bear, you deserve to get eaten by the grizzly bear. Like, you're literally, jumping in the ring with a grizzly bear, right? You're trying to play fetch with it or something, and you're surprised when all of a sudden it wants to eat you instead of the thing you're throwing at it. Like, that's kind of how it works with these kind of things. Just, they're not your friends. They're not people, like, and corporations are not people. I also don't have a problem with that, though. I just also look at it how it is. And if that's how it is, I'm not here to go and say capitalism is bad and it's all awful and we need to change the structure of everything, because I don't think that's the solution either. I think the solution is personal responsibility and become somebody of real value, start your own business, and become the person who controls your own destiny versus the other way around. You have that opportunity if you have the great ideas,
Yeah. And this is a great
and
time right now too to do this, because we're going to see right now, people talk about a recession going on right now. And I Sure, there's writing on the wall. We're getting into a recession. I'm not going to refute that. But I don't think it's as bad as people say. But that's neither here nor there. The important thing in my point is that, yes, we are heading towards a recession. We are already in it, some
Yeah.
say. I would also posit that based on what I've heard from some, leading economists out there, that we are going to have this recession for a couple of years. It's going to get better in 26, 27, and then it's going to really fall off shortly after that, and we're going to fall into a depression. We're going to fall into a Great Depression. If anyone out there is a history nerd, you know that our last Great Depression was 100 years ago, almost 100 years ago. So it'll fall in line. And these economic recessions, they come, they ebb and flow just like the tide. They come and go. They happen. Almost every 20 years we get a recession of some kind. On average, it's about 20 years historically. And those flows have gotten a little larger as economies have gotten more robust, more diversified. And for example, in the late 1990s, we managed to avoid a recession because of the dot-com boom. And Clinton administration took a lot of credit for that. Whatever, go them if you're into that, whatever. But the aspect that the depressions and recessions are going to be a constant. So have something that is your own, that is not dependent on an employer. And I'm just saying this to really drive home this point and make sure that you are ready for it. Because I need to make sure that I'm ready, whether it's this podcast or it's something else that I'm doing on the side, or that my job gives me some
You,
sort of guarantee, which I wouldn't even hold as like I wouldn't hold a lot of weight to that. If we hit a recession, if our a big
and
depression, like yeah, it's very likely my job could go by the wayside. We're a small company.
and also the other thing is just be really invaluable wherever you
Yes.
go. Like if you're gonna work for someone,
Yeah, if you're going to work for a big corporation, it gets harder to become
or
invaluable.
even a
Yeah,
small
well,
one,
no,
like
my point is just
you
like if you work for a big
yeah.
corporation, it's hard to be invaluable.
You're right. You're right. But I think if you're going to work for anyone, just finding ways to become invaluable, like, and that means focusing your attention. Like, yes, you have to be really skilled in something that a lot of other people aren't. You have to do that, and then on top of that, let's say that thing is around, say, certain types of programming or designing or creative work, whatever it is, you also have to be fun and cool to work with and
Yeah.
responsible. You have to be reliable, trustworthy. There's all sorts of little things. And I think this might be a great topic for a future episode. It's just like little rules that you apply to yourself that make you more valuable. Like, for example, being responsive to messages when you get them through, say, Slack or through any messaging service that your company decides to use, means that they can reliably send you something and know you will respond within a certain amount of time. And if you don't miss messages like that, now it doesn't mean you're always going to be beholden to it. You have to have boundaries around it. But I'm just saying that's a little thing that can be very valuable for certain parties to see that you're responsive, you care, you put in the time to respond. The other thing is to be thoughtful with your responses too, and not just respond for no reason. Like I think people always assume that, like, oh well, if I just like respond and tag everything and put my voice in everywhere, you're sticking your head out so much that you might actually be not very valuable because you're not saying anything. Like, only say things when you have value to bring to a conversation. Otherwise, you're wasting people's time, and then people just assume everything you have to say is a waste of time. You
Yeah.
know, be like when you work as a entrepreneur, one of the rules that I learned early in my entrepreneur is pay people promptly and quickly. It might seem like when you get an invoice, pay it like the next hour or the next day
It's like
at
your
the
credit card.
latest. Well, in general, but like the difference is because when you're working with contractors or anyone who's invoicing you, they will prioritize your work
Mm.
because they know you're going to pay them. And if you do that right away in your first interaction, like say you're working with an accountant, it's a great example because most employers or most entrepreneurs need an accountant. When you get your accountant bill, pay them right away. You want your accountant prioritizing your
Totally.
work. and getting it done so that they can get paid. That's like a huge deal. It's a little thing, but it actually makes you one of their top clients or a much more preferred client that they'll prioritize their work. So there's tons of little rules like this that if you should learn and should be learning as you go through working in all these types of environments. And so if you do ever, or if you have got fired, I'd love to hear more about what people have
I
gained
was
out of what
just
they've
gonna
been
say,
fired from.
yeah,
If you've been fired, maybe we can talk with you, or maybe we can send us a message to nerds at nerdpreneurpodcast.com and tell us your story. We'd love to hear more about that. If it was one of those stories where it maybe you did gain something out of it. It seemed like it sucked at first, but then it became a blessing because you started your own business, or because you did something else out there, or it landed you in a place where you were
I
much
also want
happier.
to hear from
So
people who are afraid of being fired or have the fear of, maybe there isn't a sign on the wall, but based on what we're talking about, there is that fear that you have now. I mean, I'd love to hear from you folks at, you can hit us up on Twitter at Nerdpreneur Pod, and that would just be super interesting to me. And I would love to, hear where you're coming from, but also if you want to talk about, hey, what can I do to diversify or bring more value or prepare myself for the worst case scenario, I would love to help. I'd love to at least talk. Maybe I can't solve your problems, but at least having someone to bounce this idea around with is going to help you sleep at night.
yeah, I mean, it's also like there's so many things about us speaking about it. Like I could see people who have been fired before, or maybe someone who's going through this layoff right now that's listening to this saying, well, I have family, I have house, I have car, I have, kids and tuition bill, all these things that I have to pay. And, I've built my own trap essentially that I'm stuck in. And so for them to kill this for me and for me to be laid off for 5 months, 6 months, or trying to find another job, it's going to be really, really tough and it's going to be really awful. And you just don't get that. Right. And I'm like, I don't get that personally. I get it. Like, I'm not going through it, but I do understand that when something like that happens, there's still no value in being able to in playing the victim card and blaming other people. It's not a circumstance you can change. It's not a circumstance that you are stuck in either. And that if you decide that this is all against you and you have no responsibility with it, you'll be stuck in that situation a lot longer and a lot worse without a personal amount of power to get out of it. So I encourage people who are in that situation to look at it as what it is. It could be a blessing in disguise and an opportunity, not just a
This
challenge,
reminds
because
me
that is the
this
same
reminds
thing.
me of the book Who Moved My Cheese. Is this familiar to you?
I've heard
Yeah.
of it. I haven't read it though. It's an old
Yeah,
management
yeah,
book,
yeah,
man.
it is. But
That's like my mom had that
yeah,
back in
it's
the
an old
80s on
one.
her
It's a
on her
cornerstone.
wall.
If anyone hasn't read it, it's a very short. It's like 30 or 40 pages. I'm sure you could find the PDF free. You could at least find the audio book on YouTube somewhere for free. But it's the idea of hem haw. Uh, I'm not going to go into detail on everything, partly because I can't remember all of it. But the idea, the moral of the story, is that the sooner you can adapt to changes in your environment, to the moving of the quote unquote cheese, to the things that you are pursuing, your goals, the sooner you can adapt to them, the sooner you will find that new cheese. And yes, like you said, Chris, we are not in everybody's shoes. Everyone's going to have something different from what we have been through. But that essence, the essence you said of the sooner you can adapt, come up with a plan, the sooner you're going to start to be able to sleep easy at night and have peace of mind that there is a path. And that was actually one of the biggest
Yeah.
things for me when I was not flipped at Wizards of the Coast was because I had a pretty set path in mind of how I was going to reach this ideal, this goal. And then when that fell out from under me, I can't really say it fell out from under me. It was a definite possibility that my contract wouldn't get renewed. There was a deadline, an expiration date. When that happened, I realized I can't create set paths. I can't do that. I need to go one step at a time, see what my options are, what paths open up, and then go from there and do it again and rinse and repeat. You take one step, you look at your options, you take another step, look at your options. Because as soon as you set your sights on one thing, you might be missing out on all the other things happening around you. And you may also not notice all of the risks and dangers that are blaring at you from all sides. But you're going to do it anyway because you're set on this path. That's not always the best idea. Unless you're Elon Musk and you have a shit ton of money that you can say, fuck it. I don't care what everyone else says. I'm sticking to my path. Not everyone has those resources. In fact, only a couple other people on the planet have those resources. So don't compare
Yeah.
yourself to Elon Musk.
But be very careful who you compare yourself to, anyways, whether it's Elon Musk or anybody else. But you should also, like, if you ever get fired and you get yourself into an emergency situation where you're broke, and I've talked about myself being in those situations myself, because I was being an entrepreneur isn't easy. It's like, if you leave this and then start your own business and you have no savings, you might get really, and you have family and car and
Then you've got so
house and
much
all
to
that, you might get
lose.
really
Yeah.
fucked. Like, you're literally like, that may not be the right choice. But what I'm saying is, then now at least you're in Tornado Alley. Okay. So when you're in Tornado Alley, you're going to start building your bunker. And your bunker, when you're in that Tornado Alley again, working for the next corporate job or the next opportunity that you get to, you're going to think differently about it and take it as a lesson. And if you're not in that situation and you're just watching this happen and you're working for a company or a corporation or something else along the way, take this as a lesson. You should be building your bunker. You should be building, what is my runway? And as I kind of hinted, I don't think I really finished it, but it's like, if you're at zero right now and say, get yourself $1,000 emergency fund, because it's going to happen. You're going to have an emergency no matter what. Just get that together. Even if it takes 3 months, 4 months, 6 months to save $1,000, just get it together. Keep it somewhere for a rainy day. That's your rainy day fund. Once you do that, eliminate as much debt as you possibly can, everything but the house. Like, every debt you possibly can. Maybe the car, but like every debt, like zero credit card debt, zero student loan debt, zero any other type of debt you might have, if whether it be like credit lines or something like that. Like, you just want a debt to your phone or any of those kind of things. Like, eliminate all debt. Once you get to that point of having very little debt, that's where you can start really building up your savings and your emergency fund. Get that emergency fund to 3 months and start investing, then start moving towards your 6-month salary and then having a year. That way, over the course of like you working in this other corporation or this other company for 2 years, 3 years, even 5 years, over the course of that amount of time, you really can get to a place where you've built yourself a bunker. And so you're harder to take out. You've got investments going, you've got no debt. You're not in a place where you're trapped if things go to shit, because things will go to shit at some point, whether it's macro levels that affect the business because we go through a recession or a bomb gets dropped or a war starts or a pandemic happens. Okay. All these things have happened in the last little while and nobody really was expecting them. Guaranteed it's going to happen. The best thing for you is to be building that bunker so you have some sort of runway. You have things to be able to make it harder for you to take you out, and start a business on the side. Do a side gig. Like, start hustling something on the side, because when you have side gigs and, oh wow, like, I need to replace $10,000 a month in expenses. Well, I've got this $2,000 a month business I've been running on the side that's been helping out. Now, if I lose my big income from my job, I only have to come up with 8,000 now. I have to figure something out, or I have to make that $2,000 thing into a $10,000 thing. Like, it gives you things to do and options. And if you have 3 or 4 or 5 different things that allow you to have stability, even if you lost your job, that's where I'm at right now. I'm building out legs of my sturdiness so that, like, if I lost my job or if I decided to leave that job, I would be able to have these side income things still keep me going. Maybe not quite at the same level yet, but I would have those things keep me going while I was able to dedicate more time into those revenue streams or finding the next thing I'm going to
Yeah,
do.
one of the great
So
things is that if you start now, that's less work you have to do should that rainy day come. Should you need to go to your
when it
bunker,
comes,
that's true. Should
it's
when
going
you
to
need
come.
to go to your bunker someday, having some sort of even just the foundation laid out is better than not even knowing where you're going to put your bunker in this metaphor. And
Mhm.
I encourage, if anyone doesn't even know where to start, seriously, reach out to us at Nerdpreneur Pod on Twitter. Happy to talk about it. I am always on Twitter.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate everybody listening to today's Talking Nerdy. And as always, everybody,
keep it nerdy.
Talking nerdy. We're just talking